Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Citizen Representative Podcast. I'm Tyler. I'm here with my friend Adam. It is the 23rd of March, 2021. We're very grateful and thankful that you're here with us. Adam, how are you doing?
Great, Tyler. It's
Great.
spring. Spring's finally here, right?
It's technically spring. It's pretty windy and cold here.
So,
I just want to start off really quickly, just reiterate and kind of talk about the purpose of citizen representatives. Citizen representatives is a movement that brings together people in districts and states. We come together as citizens to elect representatives and senators with the understanding that they will vote with the will of the people through a vote. Anything that they vote on as representatives or senators will have to be ratified by the people by majority vote. And that is what Citizen Representatives is about. We are we're putting this podcast out to raise awareness and get people to come on board with the idea. We're spreading the idea as best as we know how, and we would appreciate it if you find this interesting or newsworthy or noteworthy, something of value, that you would share it and like it. Adam, have you had your Krispy Kreme donut yet?
no, and
Now I asked.
I don't plan on getting one.
Okay, now the setup is that Krispy Kreme is offering a free donut to people who can show their vaccination card. Now you have to meet certain criteria. Some of the vaccinations you only have to get one dose. Some of them you have to get two. But the idea is that they're trying to promote obesity in exchange for immunity. I guess that's what they're saying. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I would only maybe consider getting the vaccine if they offered a Lehigh Bakery donut, the home of the square donut. You probably haven't had one of those because you live down south, but they are by far the best donut I've ever had. Little ma and pa shop down in Lehi, Utah, um, and they it, they might get me to consider a vaccine. Otherwise, I don't plan on getting the
No.
vaccine. Maybe if they mandate it for travel, but yeah, I mean, you'd think we through COVID with health issues being a concern for those most vulnerable to COVID that maybe sugar isn't the best thing to encourage people to consume, along
Okay,
with
so
their
back to
along with all their chemicals in the vaccine.
okay, so back to the Lehigh donuts. Do they use potato flour?
I don't think
Do
they
you
do.
know?
I don't think they
There,
do,
I
but it's
vaguely
like
remember because I was born up in that area, and my parents met in that area, kind of. And I remember going to a donut shop. It was a kind of mom and pop shop, and they had potato flour donuts, and they were very good from what I recall.
square
But
shaped.
I don't remember if they were square. Are all of the donuts from this shop square shaped?
Um, you might be able to get some different shapes. I mean, their maple bars are rectangular, as a maple bar traditionally is, but um,
So they've
they
got to
may
have
have.
90 degrees in them.
Yeah, well, that's how you capture the best. I mean, it's like melt. It's a melt in your mouth donut. And
Okay.
I love a good chocolate donut or a chocolate glaze, but you kind of don't even want to mess with that. You just want to go with traditional um, glazed donut. They're the
So
bomb.
Adam and I, before the show started, we were asking if nuts belong in ice cream, and both of us agree that they don't belong in there at all. How about on donuts? Is that a no-no, or is that something that
That's
you?
it's too busy. I I mean, I could tolerate maybe a few peanut little thingies, but yeah, too busy. I don't want it interfering with what is the donut.
Yeah. So my
Nuts are
favorite,
generally meant to go by themselves, right?
just yeah. Okay. So one of my favorites is Bavarian cream with a chocolate glaze. So I just can't get enough. That's one of my kryptonite things is somebody will bring a dozen donuts to work and I literally have I can't say no. So I'm working on my willpower. Luckily, my genetics and gut bacteria are relatively good, so I don't I'm not overweight. I you know I can eat a lot and still be okay. So
Do you have a go-to down there in your neck of the woods?
donuts.
Yeah.
So there's Lynn's Donuts. It's a grocery store. A lot of people talk about the Lynn's Donuts. There are there's Daylight Donuts. There's a couple others, but I really don't go out for donuts. Like I anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, so back to the COVID. Studies have shown that people who are heavier tend to fare worse with COVID. So it's kind of a weird kind of thing with the donuts and the vaccine. The combination of the vaccine and the donut giveaway is kind of weird. What really bothers me is throughout this whole COVID thing, there has been very little mainstream acceptance or even push toward things that we know work, which include vitamin D, which include zinc, which include other things that have shown effectiveness against viruses like this. You can't even mention those things without people just going after you. The vitamin D thing is so obvious, and there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that it's very good against, first of all, preventing these types of things, and there's just it's just one of those things that you can't talk about. There's so many things like that nowadays that you are not allowed to talk about that work. When when this is coming out, there was so much. There were many doctors out there who had certain cocktails and certain protocols that involved the Z packs and involved um, what's the hydroxychloroquine and some of these other things that they were very effective in helping reduce the severity of the symptoms and keeping people out of the hospital. But
Yeah.
those people were deplatformed, and it's very weird because shouldn't we be trying to find anything that works? And it just seemed like the powers that be did not want people to be okay. What's your
Yeah.
take on that?
Yeah, well, and particularly if it was endorsed by somebody that had opposing other views than you, right? And so this became the demonization um, by association. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I don't know why, um, and I know that I know a lot of people in Western medicine that advocate, yes, number one, get exercise, eat well. Um, but it seems like the messaging isn't there enough, and too often the messaging is, we'll solve all your problems. We have medicines. We have a medicine for everything. You got a heart problem, so we'll just solve it with a pill instead of encouraging healthier habits. And I realize they do, but at the same time, it's always like, well, we've always got a drug over here. And so let's pump your body full of chemicals that will correct your particular, health issue because that's easier than, encouraging you and coaching you to change habits. And so this has been going on for a long time, and it's like they're working against each other, right? The processed foods and the sugars and things that we now are beginning to understand in a different way if you care to read outside the normal mainstream of medical uh, medical literature, we're understanding fats in a different way that we didn't 30 years ago, and understanding that a lot of that science wasn't actual science. It was based, on unproven theories, and you look at health today and some of the problems we have with obesity. We didn't solve the obesity problem by telling people to not eat fats, right? The opposite happened. It was the high carb processed foods that actually got us to this point. And so, but we'll solve that problem with a nice drug or a cocktail of this, that, and the other, and vaccines. Now we vaccinate like crazy, and I'm not against vaccines by any means, but I do question the numbers of vaccines that we do, and the vaccines for every little thing. I mean, yeah, I don't like the conflicting messages, and this just highlights, Krispy Kreme trying to do the right thing, encourage people, I guess, that are vulnerable to COVID to get their vaccine shot. But for the record, I'm probably going to resist the donut and the vaccine shot until they tell me I can't travel, and then
And
I'll
you'll
have
just
to make,
fold.
yeah, I'll fold like a paper cup at that point, I guess. I
A
don't
wet
know.
paper
Yeah.
cut.
What?
Yeah, yeah. What gets me is, okay, they close the beaches. Okay, the viruses cannot survive in sunlight. They just don't for longer than a few seconds. You're out in
Right.
sunlight. The viruses are not being spread at the beach, by and large. Excuse me. You're getting your vitamin D, which is protecting you from the virus and other items. Um,
Breathing that sea salt air.
Breathing the sea salt air, getting that in, and yeah, it's just anyway. So, in other news, how come you're such a white supremacist today, Adam?
I was born this way. Apparently, I can't do anything about it other than maybe read some books about my privilege and paying somebody else to forgive me for my sins. Um, what do they call that? Indulgences, right? Where
Indulgences, yeah.
indulgences where you pay for your sins.
So
Offsets,
we're
carbon
looking, yeah,
offsets.
we're working today, or we're looking today at the news, and things that have never been connected to white supremacy are being connected to white supremacy. Candace Owens, who's a black commentator, black conservative commentator, is now being told on Twitter, "You left your Klan hood, her KKK hood. She's left it somewhere. Somebody's telling her this. So now apparently Candace Owens, because she believes in personal responsibility and many of these things, she is now a Klan member and deserving of being ridiculed and hated. Back to you being a white supremacist.
Oh,
Go ahead,
yeah, and Candace Owens, right?
Candace Owens. Yeah.
Who preaches self-sufficiency and accountability and meritocracy and wants to encourage people to, um, that they can rise out of any situation if they choose. That, yeah, those are all tenets of white supremacy. It's a really bad philosophy. We shouldn't encourage that kind of behavior. I just can't believe we encourage accountability in this society, and that we're really all victims, except, I guess, is it just the white race that's not victims?
Um,
Can
well,
we ever
some
claim
in the white race are victims,
some?
but the straight white male is not. That's straight white males are at the bottom of the so-called totem pole. Probably straight white females after that, and I don't know where it goes after that.
Right.
But straight white males, by definition, are
Definitely not.
racist and are oppressors and are the worst of society,
Yeah.
apparently. So that's what we're
So
working with today. Go ahead.
what am I supposed to do with that as a white male? Am I supposed to? I know I'm supposed to give money for to make penance. Do I? I mean, and I'm supposed to apologize at every social encounter, every, you know, I should probably go on. I mean, we should both probably just make formal apologies right here, right now. Um, I mean, what else do I need to not be motivated and um, do I need to not succeed anymore? Is that the solution?
No, you can do that because otherwise
I
you
can't
won't have enough
support
money to donate. Yeah, and
to
you
the
won't be able to
government, which
support.
can allocate it more intelligently than I can. Gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. Now you're getting with it. Now you're getting
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So I got to be productive, but I got to be apologetic and um, okay. I can do that
So
if they'll
now,
give
go
me a
ahead.
Krispy Kreme.
I'm going to need at least a dozen Krispy Kremes. Now we're getting to the point where there's a very funny. I don't know that funny is the word, but it's a very interesting split. You have colleges who actively discriminate against Asian Americans, or even not just Asian American, anyone who is of Asian descent, because they score too high on the tests, which is I think one reason that they are now not using by and large the SATs and the ACTs, because those have been taken over by Asians and Indians and white people. So for the purposes of academia, Asians and Indians and they're grouped with the white people. And then when it's convenient, now we stop the Asian hate. Okay, first it was Black Lives Matter, now it's Asian Lives Matter
Right.
because it seems to have been convenient because there was a shooting in Georgia where a gentleman who felt guilty for indulging in some sexual pleasures, he felt guilty and he wanted to eliminate, this is according to him, I don't know if this is actually true, but he wanted to eliminate some of the temptation that he had. And so he went and shot up some of these massage parlors that he evidently had frequented. And
Yeah.
so he eliminates, and some of the people in there happen to be Asian. Some of the victims were white. But for the purposes of the political um, movement of the day or the political dogma of the day, now it's stop the Asian hate because this gentleman sadly took out some of his shortcomings on some of these Asian and other women.
Right.
Well, so now when people now it's stop the Asian hate, but when there is actually quite a bit of Asian hate out there, but
Right.
by and large, when you look at the studies, it's perpetuated by African Americans. So now that people are actually looking at the data and the numbers, now of course that's not useful anymore. It was only useful for one or two news cycles, and now we have to drop it.
Yeah. Yeah. And universities, we can't forget them. They're perpetuators of Asian hate by virtue of their policies.
So then, of course, that's very tragic. Then we have a tragic shooting in Boulder, Colorado. The There were pictures of the gentleman being arrested, and he appeared white. And so, of course, all the blue check mark Twitter now it's white supremacy, it's white privilege because this guy wasn't shot. If you were, this is from um, Tariq Nasheed. The fact that this dude gunned down 10 people and the police didn't shoot his blank, that means he's white. Okay, let me back up. Before he sent this out, the news came out that the gentleman who shot these and killed these 10 people is Islamic. He's from Somalia. He's from a different country
Syria,
who incident
isn't it?
Syria, who incidentally came into the United States through an Obama program, in my understanding, for refugees, and he had ISIS sympathies, and so now that he's been identified as not a white person, well, now he actually is white because he wasn't shot. So let me go back to the tweet. The fact that this dude gunned down 10 people and the police didn't shoot his blank, that means he's white. We ain't going to start playing games just because he was born in Syria. The suspect is white enough to benefit from the privileges of whiteness. So my point was, he was making a point that why didn't they just shoot him? If it's, I guess, it's a well-known fact among all the people on Twitter that if you're black, you're going to get gunned down. Well, I don't think that's the case. You think that these officers want to go through? First of all, I don't think any sane officer, does not want to shoot and kill someone
Sure.
for an innocent person who's just if unless they're being shot at or are actively needing to defend themselves. I don't think any officer would want to inflict harm on someone.
Of course.
Why would anyone want to why would anyone want to do that? I just don't follow the line of reasoning that because he's still living, he's now taking advantage of white privilege. I don't get that. Am I missing something?
Oh, it's nonsensical. I mean, it's typical, um, and it's backhanded, right? Because it distracts from. We always, for the last what 20 years, we've been trying to be apologists for Islamophobia, when really what we have is Islamophobia phobia. We're afraid to call out radicalized um, Islamic belief and some of the things that the violent things that people are willing to do in the name of their beliefs. Few, not all, obviously, not and not even a majority by any means, but um, this becomes a convenient way to not only perpetuate what's been going on with this narrative of white supremacy and white privilege, but it also distracts from the other angle of the story, which is okay, yes, he happened to be from an Islamic country. Did that play a role? And so now we can gloss over that. We don't have to go there, right, as a motivation, because that would be too convenient, and it doesn't fit a certain ideology, a certain narrative. I shouldn't say ideology. It doesn't fit a certain narrative, political narrative, and so it's just it becomes very it's the argument of convenience, that you can flip the switch and go to white privilege, and um, I think it's just a distraction. The other knee-jerk reaction, obviously, is going to be gun control, and using this to when, but all of these things, white privilege, um, white supremacy, uh, gun control, they all none of it is supported by what's actually fact, what actually happens and occurs in society, and why people commit these things. I don't know why we can't just accept that people that are very sick and commit terrible murder and do terrible things, and that's a fact of life. But yeah, it's beyond me why this particular Twitter commentator would um, want to jump to that, other than it's opportunistic and it's convenient to perpetuate really what is calling for not coming together, but not inclusivity, but it's actually calling for us to pull ourselves more apart and be more divided, and provoke more hatred for different races, and that's, I think, the very definition of racism, right?
So, of course, the irony is that a lot of these people, they, of course, jumped on the guy for being white in the beginning before we knew all the details. And then they couldn't backpedal hard enough or fast enough and delete tweets and start making excuses for, oh, we need to not focus on the shooter anymore. There were several blue checkmark Twitter people who, oh, this is because he's white. This is a white guy, whatever. And then his name comes out, his background, his Facebook page, and oh, we need to not give this guy any attention.
Yeah.
It,
How many times does that happen in a week, right? This knee-jerk reaction to try and fit the narrative, and then all of a
oh,
sudden
that's
the facts come out, and then it's
it's
trying to
almost
talk
every
over
time
the, yeah,
when something will come out that appears very. I mean, it is very bad.
yeah.
In all respects, it's a terrible situation. But people are always there to try to put their spin on it. I mean, we're doing that too, to an extent. I'm not that unself-aware that we're not doing that, but we need to have some sort of standards.
Well, and you think if anything, as citizens of the world, we could unite in our condemnation of violence in any form, whoever it comes from, no matter what, no matter how it's perpetuated, no matter what the weapon is, we all condemn that, right? And that should be bringing us together. Um, and yeah, then we got to look at solutions, and just flipping the switch and going to our default positions. Um, that doesn't work. But you think, that just because you have a different belief about what should be the solution to a certain problem, that somehow you're associated with not condemning the act, and that's just not the case. We all condemn this act. We condemn all violence, um, and so that should be a unifying thing for us and bring us together and really draw us to want to find solutions and talk and debate those things.
So I want to go on it's not really a tangent, but an associated kind of principle. And I'll lead with this. Neighbors with, this is from the Babylon Bee, which if you're not familiar with it, is a satire site. They tend to do, they're Christian, but it's very funny. It's one of the funniest follows and sites that you'll ever see. Neighbors with Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, and Hispanic Lives Matter yard signs getting awfully close to All Lives Matter. And so, of course, it can never be White Lives Matter. But you can't even say being white is okay. It's okay to be white. You can't even say that and not be in danger of being canceled.
Human lives matter, I guess. Maybe not all humans. No.
No,
Okay.
especially
That's fine.
especially not those lives before birth.
What
Anyway,
about what about alien lives? Do they matter? If
um,
from other planets?
I'm hearing there's a lot of UFOs actually. I've read this in a number of spots that a lot of people in the military and in some of these places are saying, yeah, there's a lot of UFOs out there. Now that doesn't mean that they're alien. It could just mean
Right.
it's somebody's drone that they have figured out how to fly at a couple hundred miles an hour or whatever. But UFOs, okay, you're sidetracking me.
Sorry.
We get back to the idea of guilt and indulgences. Now I'm going to bring up a principle that you don't have to believe this. I think principles can have several layers of meaning. I'm LDS, so one of the articles of faith is we believe that man will be punished for their own sins and not for Adam's transgression. Okay, now I'm not going to talk about original sin as far as original sin itself. I take this principle to also mean we should not feel guilty for things that we haven't ever done. Okay, we should not have to take responsibility and feel any sort of burden for things that we do not actively perpetuate or have not participated in. And that's what a lot of these people are trying to make us do through guilt and through many other kind of emotional manipulations, to try to make us feel guilty and kneel and grovel and pay reparations and do things of this nature to enrich them. Basically, it's a you've talked about kind of this idea before of you creating your own market. Many of the environmentalists do that. If we actually solve the problems with the environment, there would be no environmentalist movement, by and large. If there were no racial tensions or issues, there would be no need for Al Sharpton or Tariq Nasheed or any of these people who are peddling these types of ideas, the critical race theories and things like that. So the idea is that you have no responsibility to feel any sort of guilt for things that you haven't done. Now, am I taking this too far, or am I misunderstanding this type of principle?
No, I mean, I think a rational person would say that principle sounds pretty sound. It's, would you just because does anybody have control? As far as we know, do we have control over where we're born, what skin color we have, what family we're born into, how where that family is on the socioeconomic scale? Um, no, nobody has control over that, and it's ludicrous to think that um, it's the very definition of racism to call out another race for um, for things over which they have no control, and as you're talking about, no association with the horrible things that have happened in our history. I think we're all capable of feeling that emotion of very very deep emotion about atrocities of the past, whether that's slavery in any form in any country, um, you know, genocides that have been committed throughout our history. But it's, we come in pretty fresh to this world. Whatever was going on, perhaps before this world, if there was such a thing, I believe there was, but whatever was going on before, we still come in fresh without a knowledge of that, without consciousness of that, and so how can we possibly be accountable for those past things just because we happen to be born into a particular segment of society?
I think guilt and just kind of the related emotional manipulation is such a driver of what's going on, and not just with racial tensions, but with economics, with politics, with pretty much anything that's out there. There's this need for people to want to manipulate people and get them to do what they want through this manipulation that we shouldn't have. I think one of the uh, it's very powerful once you're able to shed the guilt for things that you shouldn't feel guilty about. It's very liberating, and it, it's first of all, it's very difficult to do because you
Yeah,
first have to recognize that you're feeling it,
yeah.
and you first have to recognize that you are being controlled by other people through your guilt and things like this. And how do we even start? I don't know. What do you think?
To resist the temptation to become vulnerable to that manipulation, is that what you're saying? Is that what
Well,
you're
how do we
asking?
even first recognize? How do we even first understand that this is happening? How do we first of all understand that we shouldn't feel guilt for things that we shouldn't feel guilty about?
by discussing it,
I don't know.
talking about it, and not being not conforming to the narrative because it sounds sophisticated or because it was published by some academic somewhere. Um, uh, just having open and honest discussion. Am I fallible just for the sins of this country's past just because I'm white? It's Let's talk about that. Why? No, I mean we have talked about it here. I think we have to continue to have those discussions at the dinner table, in social settings, and push back. When when you're when somebody in the family or a friend, associate at work says, well, that's just white privilege. You can say, explain that to me, explain to me the white privilege. I think another, you mentioned the principle of, we're not accountable for past sins, the sins of the father. Another parable that's helpful, that doesn't have to be understood in a religious context, but you could just understand it as a principle, is the parable of, the talents, right? And you could espouse that better than I can, but basically, the somebody is given 10 talents, another one's given 5, and another one's given 1. Um, is it the king or the father that's giving these talents? Do you remember?
I think you're making a big assumption that I can talk about this better than you can.
Well, you're still going regularly to your church meetings. I kind of, um,
Okay, attending is one thing. No, I'm joking. It doesn't matter who. It's the principle is
the
that
principle is, yeah,
somebody just put it under, dug it up, and or buried it, did
yeah,
nothing with it, and the
yeah,
others did something with it.
yeah. So the idea, privilege. Okay, you had 10 talents, or you had, let's call it $10,000 you started out with, right? As opposed to the guy that had only 5,000 or 1,000. What did you do with it? Did you multiply it? Did you take your 10,000 and make 100,000, which would be a pretty good return on investment, and that benefits society as a whole, right? It's not just for you, but you're generating revenue for society as a whole, creating other jobs, doing other, what are you doing? So if you've got white privilege, if you want to call it that, fine. What are you doing? Are you are you being a good family member, whether you have children of your own, whether you're married? Are you being good to your parents? Are you being a good neighbor? Are you, being productive in society? Are you, and if you had a nice education and a nice, it was all paid for, um, what did you do with that? Did you bury it in an office and just, I don't want to be critical of anybody for anything, but I think that's the idea, is what are you giving back to society eventually? If you want to look at it that way, um, then sure, let's talk about those who perhaps waste their opportunity versus those who don't. And I don't condemn either, and I don't want to fall into the trap of guilting anybody for not perhaps living up to, their potential. I think in any given life we have opportunities, but that also doesn't. This is another thing. Thomas Sowell's book that I mentioned a few weeks ago, about discrimination and disparities. He talks about, um, the idea that just because you have one, say say there are 10 benefits to life. You come into life and you have, um, there are 10 optimal situations, scenarios, um, things that you could have that would help you to get along in life, right? One of those could be the class you're born into. One of them might be your social interactions, people you know. Um, you could say race, or, on the basis of, sometimes we do have prejudices, and, at least we've started to acknowledge these to a great deal, I think, but they're there. But the negation of just one element, that predicts success. Say you're born with bipolar disorder. Or do you have white privilege at that point? Does that mean that you know, I mean, because that bipolar could drag you down, you know, in a way that, you know, and that's, you know, certainly people succeed with bipolar, but um, that one element could detract from all the other beneficial um, things in your life. Now, Thomas Sowell says it much better than I just did, but hopefully that idea is conveyed that um, just one single thing, the fact that I'm white, you know, I could still be born in a very impoverished neighborhood and have an abusive um, parent. And so we can't use these as predictors of success or, you know, and we shouldn't use them as means to try and create an entitlement society for
I
those
think,
who don't have that one distinction.
yeah, I think both you and I would agree that it's so important to have personal responsibility that it doesn't it does matter how you start off because you can have a leg up on someone else. I think to an
Absolutely.
extent it does matter. You look at Ben Carson who was born and he was raised in the projects and single mother, and he apparently tried to stab his mother at one time. And he decided that he was gonna not he didn't want that anymore. So he worked his behind off and got up to the be one of the top neurosurgeons in the country. And
Yeah.
it all depends on what you do with it. Now, this is related, but maybe Jesus understood inflation because right now, I know this is kind of a tangent. You have you have a dollar or a talent, and you put it under, you go bury it somewhere, and you're just going to save it. Well, every year, if you look at the inflation indexes, the indices, and things of that nature, the value of that goes down and down by some measures this year, 20%. So by not doing anything with it, that will eventually be worth nothing. And so what are you going to have to show to the master? When you have the 5 or the 10 talents, I don't remember the exact quantities, but it was something like that. And you go out and do something with it, now you're understanding that you have to do something with that. And it's just an interesting thing that I thought of. An interesting discussion. So we've talked about that. Um, Now, will we all be living on floating islands soon?
Gosh, I hope so. That, I mean,
Now,
yeah. Let's build one. Can
what?
we build one?
Yeah,
Aren't they
yeah.
just
I think
we get enough sand in the ocean? We can build our own, kind of like the Chinese are doing in the South Sea.
well, Adam was saying I was going to fund one because I have like a fraction of a Bitcoin and it'll be worth a lot of money someday. And I said, well, we'll have to use empty 2 liter bottles and string them together, and I can create a big floating mass that we can settle, and it will be
A nice
um,
raft.
cola cola land or something, one of those knockoff colas.
Got to start somewhere.
Now we're being a little bit silly but serious at the same time because there so many things are kind of clamping down on us. But I did find some good news I saw on Yahoo News, which I try not to frequent because it's just so much like you guys are way off. But this seemed to be nice. A lot of Californians are relocating in Thailand. Now I don't know, or excuse me, Taiwan, and I was all for this because there are so many people from California coming to my neck of the woods that real estate prices, there are many factors about why real estate prices are going up, but I've heard of time and time again people coming from either California or Oregon or Washington, these West Coast states. They're fleeing their states and coming to Nevada and Arizona and Utah and some of the more not on the coast western states, and paying cash and jacking up all the prices. And they can work from wherever they want because they're in the tech sector. Or something that doesn't, they don't need to be in a factory, they don't need to be in a shop, and they can be anywhere that they want. So I found this a little encouraging that many of these Californians were choosing to go to Taiwan instead of here. Do you support this, Adam, or are you a Californian that I came here and now I'm offending you?
No. I know a lot of people that are very upset with California. A lot of Californians and the state of things right now. And I think what you're alluding to here is the that's great that they want to come to a state where you got lower taxes. I think that's why a lot of these people are going. Less restrictions, especially COVID kind of heightened this, and the article that you mentioned alludes or talks about that COVID kind of accelerated this migration. But the problem is that then they come here and they vote um, with the same kind of beliefs that they had when they were in these states, California, Oregon, Washington, which got them into the situation where they had leaders who passed legislation and raised taxes in a way that was, became very too oppressive for them. And so then they come here and they vote a similar way, thinking, well, this is conservative Utah, no big deal. You could use a little opposition. Well, before long, I mean, Salt Lake might as well be Los Angeles at this point, the way it votes. And so now what do we face? We face potentially more regulation, higher taxes. And so now the migration brings with them the same policies, which were the reasons they left in the first place. So where does that leave Utah 20 years from now, right? When it really settles in. And that's the scary part for you and me.
There are fewer and fewer places to go, which is why we were alluding to the floating islands. And this, again, we say that kind of tongue in cheek, but this will be something that will happen.
Yeah.
There will be, and there already are people working on this.
Yeah. You're referring to seasteading, the idea of seasteading, either purchasing existing islands, though there's not a lot of that available, or actually building your own city on a sea.
So I just want to make it clear that doesn't, what I was saying about Californians, that doesn't apply to all Californians, because I know quite a few personally who have come to Utah and they vote just like the majority of Utahns.
Sure.
They're very conservative, and they were in California because of whatever reason, and they wanted to.
It's a beautiful state, right?
Oh yeah, I served my mission there. My dad is from California, so he's not a liberal by any stretch. He's very conservative, and so I'm not. I just say that for the sake of brevity, and now it's not that short because I'm talking about it for 10 minutes to justify it. But the premise is that there will be fewer and fewer places to go for people. I think we talked about this in a previous podcast where the powers that be have used COVID to clamp down on a lot of things that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. They've been able to restrict our movements. They've been able to not allow us to go to the beach. And, these things sound so just, why would you go to the beach anyway? You're gonna kill grandma. And
wear a mask. You're saving lives.
Yeah. So they're in the water. They're in their water wearing their double mask to not spread.
It works better when it's wet. It works better when it's wet.
Yeah, there's less permeability in the mask when it's wet. So I think that's the next step. You have to dip them in maybe some isopropyl alcohol or maybe some Germex. You have to dip your masks in some sort of antiviral solution, and then wear it. And that's the best way to do it. So part of what I wanted to talk about in the it'll probably be the concluding segment that we talk about, is the idea of the sovereign individual. Now, The Sovereign Individual is a book that was written about 20 years ago, and it was written by a couple of gentlemen who were very forward thinkers. They did quite a bit of historical research about the different kind of revolutions, talking about life before the printing press, life during kind of the period of when the printing press was invented, the life after, kind of the agricultural revolution. I don't know if I'm getting these in order. The Industrial Revolution. What comes after that? Is it the technological revolution? There are quite a bit of revolutions that people talk about, just kind of major earth-changing kind of movements that cause people to have to move and do things differently. And part of the idea of the sovereign individual is that eventually, with the advent of the internet and with the advent of, they called it digital money, I believe, or digital currency, that borders will fall, nationalism will be reduced, and people will relocate to wherever offers them the best idea or the best deal. And this is kind of how the United States was set up. The states were set up to be individual laboratories for people to be able to go to and experiment and do things that kind of broke the mold and were different and allowed for freedom and kind of, hey, I want to try this. Let's see how this goes. And we're getting to the point where so many of the states are all going to be doing the same things that it won't really matter where you live, because it'll all be the same. And I'm not talking about that in a good way. There's a concerted effort by people in power to reduce the freedom that people have. And the premise of the book is that sooner or later, by whatever force needs to make it happen, whether it's, well, they kind of postulated that it would just kind of happen on its own. And I think that it will. That countries will be forced to compete for their citizens. And I think one of the biggest drivers of this, and the reason that they'll have to do this, is because of so much information out there. People are able to see what goes on in different countries and compare it to theirs. And right now we're kind of we have kind of a point of tension, like we mentioned last week. It's kind of a turning of the screws, so to speak, of people. And that's going to create a lot of opportunities once that press or once that screw kind of explodes, because people aren't going to take it. People can be pushed into doing something for a while, but sooner or later, people want to be free. And part of the idea of this is that one of the biggest drivers of this is cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, because what it's doing is taking away a lot of the power of the people who create currency. One of the biggest drivers of war and violence is being able to take things from people and keep them for yourself. And one of the things that cryptocurrency allows is people can't do that anymore. Unless they're able to crack your mind and read your mind and get your passwords, they can't get your money if you have it in the right type of wallet and things of that nature. So eventually, people will not. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for this. I don't think. I mean, I'm for people being free. I think there still is some utility in nations until there are more free nations out there. I don't know what else. I don't know what else to do, but but try to preserve what we have. But what do you think of this idea, Adam, of people in the future not being tethered to any particular country and just going wherever they want based on what a country can offer?
Yeah, I mean, we have that on a very low level right now, except that, this article talks about being tied to standardized ways of living, whether it's, if you're a factory worker, you're a factory worker, you don't have the mobility. And the internet and software has opened up those avenues to where more and more people can begin to have that freedom. I mean, anybody can start a website, right? Start a company, if they have the initiative and the determination. But I think what's really interesting about what's going on, and I think it's these movements are kind of inevitable, right? They happen as long as there's some, as long as there are groups of people who still value freedom. These movements just kind of happen throughout history, and they become these ensigns on the hill, so to speak, of what, a lot of times they're resented, but eventually people go, hey, I kind of like what they're doing over there in America. Let's think about getting rid of the monarchy and going with a democracy. I think this is a good way to go. And then over time, these things deteriorate. I mean, we're seeing some deterioration of that in our own country right now, and that's what's kind of making everybody a little anxious. But I think because the idea of freedom still exists, and as we become more technologically advanced, it's going to help accelerate that. Ray Kurzweil, I don't know if he wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. And one of the main ideas in that book is that these things accelerate these movements of technology throughout history. You mentioned all of the different periods, the industrial age, the technological age, but they become exponential, right? So each movement becomes exponentially the movement into that age, and the movement within that age becomes exponentially greater each time. So the industrial age took 150 years to kind of go its course. The technological age, we know now we're in the the 2000s, and things have when you consider, you and I probably grew up on a black and white television, and now we got monitors in every room, full HD, internet at our fingertips on our phones. These are the things of science fiction that have just happened. And so this next movement, to think that it's going to take 100 years, it won't. This is going to happen in the next 20 years. It's going to start to happen. It's going to be quick, and it's going to come fast because technology is going to adapt our means of production. You have, 3D printing, this type of thing. And we're going to be so much less reliant on the manual physical labors that, those things will still be necessary to a degree, but we're going to have automated manual labor now doing all these things for us. And so to build a city on the sea, yeah, it's going to take a lot of money, but the technology is going to be there, and it's just going to take some inventive person with initiative who wants to drive that, but it's going to happen fast. I mean, I think we're going to look back 25 years from now and go, holy cow, yeah, that wasn't just a pipe dream, that was a reality.
Now, I don't know that this is true, but well, how do I phrase this? COVID is a catalyst for this. Okay. So I read and I watch a lot of podcasts. They tend to be talking a lot about Bitcoin and kind of the revolutionary nature of Bitcoin. And one of the main people in the news about Bitcoin nowadays is a man by the name of Michael Saylor. He's the CEO of MicroStrategy, and he's invested quite a large sum of money into Bitcoin. And one of the things that he talked about was at the beginning of COVID, his business ran very differently than how it is being run now. He said, if you would have told me a month ago, talking about back then, that we would have no conferences, we'd have no sort of in-person meetings, that people would be working from their homes, I would have thought you were crazy. If you were a consultant and came up with this idea, and he would have kicked you out of his office. And then COVID hit, and it forced a lot of changes immediately on his company. And this is true for a lot of industries. A lot of industries, prematurely or not, are going through changes that would have happened inevitably. And some of those where people in the tech industry, by and large, have fared well. They
Better
have
than well.
been able. Okay, a lot of people are able to work from home just as well, or even better, than they were working in an office. Now, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, even, I was in the drilling industry not too long ago, and um, you think about how hands-on that business is, and in a lot of ways, it still was. You still have to be in there drilling. You still have to get the products to market and things like that, and provide the services. But a lot of the, back office, instantly IT department kicked into action and spun up, computers to be able to do everything remote and by VPN, and Zoom became a thing. So yeah, I mean, I saw this um, even in a very industrial type company, not particularly um, techy in terms of software and whatnot. But and right now, in the data center industry, yeah, I mean, we'll, we can do a lot of things from home, and we'll continue to be able to do a lot of things from home. So I mean, that was your question, I guess. That what's my experience?
Yeah, so my brother-in-law works in kind of your area, in your neck of the woods, and he was changing jobs. He was going from one job to the next. And I said, so be honest, because he's working from home. How many hours are you working a day at your current job? And I don't know that he gave me a straight answer, but I took it to mean like 3. I'm like, your other job's going to be that same way. Just keep both jobs, and you just kind of, interlace them. You could be making double or more what you're making now. You could be carrying 2 jobs, and then you'd be working a full day, and you're still working from home. But I don't think he went for that.
I won't say whether that might have been a possibility for me or not. But now that you say that, that's interesting.
Well, I'm sure that other people have done that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you have the skills. I know at certain points in my job, I could easily handle at least a part-time job while I'm at work.
I mean,
Not that I would.
yeah. No, I mean, if you can get the job done, right? Who's to take that away from you? If you're getting the job done and performing according to what the company has asked you to do, then I suppose, yeah, that is a possibility.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is kind of the transition from 9 to 5. This has some very concerning, what's the word? I'm concerned about the future, because there are a lot of people, probably the majority of people, are not in the situation that you are in, or my brother-in-law, that are in technology, that can go and just move wherever they want, or be very flexible, or make an alternative income. And so that's where people have brought up the idea of universal basic income, which by and large I'm not for that.
Right.
but I don't know. Maybe in the future there is a place for that. I don't know. That generally goes against the principles that I stand for, which is personal responsibility, caring for yourself, caring for your family on your own, and not being at the whims of the state or being, on the dole. Now what I don't know where that takes us. I don't know how that's all going to play out, but a lot of smart people have talked about that.
A lot of these utopian ideas, what happens is we tend, very altruistic people tend to adopt that, and oh, that sounds wonderful, everybody having everything they need and all their needs met for. And of course, I think everybody in their heart of hearts would like, well, not everybody, but a lot of people would like to see that. But what's the practical implementation of that? And is it possible to make those leapfrog advances if you don't go through the process of struggling to get there and allow the consciousness of humanity to come together and desire that as a whole? I think the movement of society has to drive that. We can't just have these altruistic ideas and try and get there without implementing the other necessary steps before we get to that point. And I think it takes a real recognition that we're not there yet, as a society. There's plenty of desire to have everything you want all the time. But that has its benefits too, because society generally benefits when people are inventive and moving and creating an economy that's robust. So I think universal income, maybe not stated quite that way, is something to that degree where everybody's needs are taken care of. I think that's a good thing, right? But how that plays out and what that looks like, I think may be different than the government handing you a paycheck. I don't think that's a good system, right? I don't like anything where a centralized authority is controlling how that occurs.
Yeah, that's always what happens with socialism and communism, because they're centrally controlled and the freedom of the people is removed. They're destined to fail. Now, I'm not against some of the ideals of communism or socialism, like you're saying, but it has to be through free will and not through, bureaucrats and people who feel that they're above us. It has to be something from the grassroots and I don't know what that's going to be. I know that J.J. Dewey talks about that a little bit in his book that Citizen Representatives is based on. In Molecular Politics, he talks about molecular business, which is a term that he uses to talk about how people in a business, when they start the business, they'll all be paid the same and share. It's basically owner operated, and it's owned by all of the employees. And there's some different ins and outs that we won't really get into here, but perhaps that's a method that we can use to help people have more equity. So I really don't like the words equity, because they're used against things that I like. But
Yeah.
That is definitely true. And I think that one of the main drivers of inequity is actually the central banks. And I don't want to get into a huge discussion on that, but inflation is a tax on the poor. When more money is printed than is necessary, and it's just printed just to prop up industries and things that shouldn't be propped up because they would fail on their own, the poor are generally not participating in assets that appreciate. The poor are not, by and large, owning homes, and they're not, by and large, participating in the stock market, and they're not doing things that they don't own assets that appreciate. They own things that depreciate, and so an inflation is a tax on the poor. This is one of the greatest things about Bitcoin and its kind of revolutionary nature, is that it's deflationary. it gains value over time because there's only so many Bitcoin ever created, and the supply is going down while the demand is going up. So that same parable of the talents, by putting your talent and burying it, well, that Bitcoin, if the parable were about Bitcoin, then maybe that the idea of inflation would be kind of flipped on its head. It's it's something that gains value over time. I think the idea of working and increasing your thing is still important, but the the idea that I mean, there's a lot of changes coming, and I mean, I'm just here for the show, I guess.
Yeah. As you're talking through that, it kind of solidified what I was thinking about with this idea of trying to leapfrog evolution. And the fact is, I think and I know from working, we probably feel most satisfied as a human being when we feel like we're contributing, like when we're accomplishing something, and driven towards something, and incentivized towards something. So if you take that away and just hand everybody an income, the incentive to get things done and move to higher, to better states of livingness and freedom, you've de-incentivized it by just turning it over. Society has to evolve a little bit more, and we need to get all people feeling fulfilled in their life roles, whatever they happen to be doing in life. Because if you don't have the drive to get up in the morning and contribute, you're not going to be a happy human being. I don't care how much money you're making, right? So we have to incentivize people to wake up in the morning and want to live. And if we just make income universal, I don't think it will accomplish that. I think it will accomplish quite the opposite.
No, now I think part of, we're talking about citizen representatives and the ideas that we get together as people in a district, and we elect people that will vote as the people vote. I think it's important that whatever we do, it be by the majority of the majority will, the majority rules. And as you're talking about these things, it's important that these things don't come by decree and from on high, and you must obey and do these things, or by penalty of law, or by penalty of fines, or liens, or things like that. And citizen representatives, we're talking about sovereign individuals, people leaving the United States. Well, this idea of coming together in elections is not just, it's not limited to the United States. The idea and principle that we're bringing forth with citizen representatives is not to be just applied in the United States. I think once that people can see that they have a more of a role in the laws and things that are put forth in their country, it'll be a good thing. When people are more informed about what's going on and have a greater role in what happens, then, like you're talking about, when people have a role and they have some skin in the game, so to speak, then things tend to work better. This is again why the socialism and communism have tended to fail, because people were just given things, and then there was no incentive to go and make something better. They were just, there may have been enough to survive, but by and large it was just, okay, well, I'm going to get my stipend. Why do I need to do anything more than that? And those who worked a little bit harder, well, they were taken from, and so, it's very complex but simple at the same time, and it's freedom. It's doing things that empower you. It's being personally responsible and contributing that way.
Well, and I think citizen representatives cuts to the core of identifying actual producers versus passive participants. And I think one of the biggest passive participants in society are politicians, right? They don't contribute a damn thing. Um, they pontificate, and I know both sides believe strongly in their ideology, and they believe one of the reasons they're there and they exist is to push back against the other side because they believe the other side's wrong. But in the end, they don't produce anything of value, right? I mean,
And they're not forced to live by their own laws that they put out,
right. Yeah,
by and
good
large.
enough for thee, but not for me. But what this could do is now you know, if can you imagine if both the Democrats and the Republicans adopted citizen representatives and the people were actually making the decisions? It would take away all this time that's spent on rhetoric and debate. And it's like, well, here's the bill. This is what the people want. Let's vote. You know, you cut that time down, and they, you know, they could actually they might have some free time on their hands to be actual producers of society. They could go get another job, and then we could cut their salaries in half, and they wouldn't have to go to Washington to well, I mean, I guess maybe we still want some of that tradition, but anyway, it would take away that lifetime. I mean, probably the incentive to be lifetime politicians, right? It's like, I'm just going to go do my duty because my constituents elected me. I can go do this for 4 years, sure.
Yeah.
But
I'm
you cut a lot of that, um, that silly nonsense out of the game.
there's a lot of glamour with being a politician right now, especially in DC, and I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for the future of citizen representatives. Adam, I appreciate your contributions here tonight. Again, my name is Tyler. With my friend Adam, we've been talking about a lot of things tonight. Our podcast is available on anywhere that podcasts are: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. It's available on YouTube in video form. It's on Facebook in video form. We're working on putting out shorter clips so that you can share some of these clips if you find them interesting. We would really appreciate it if you would donate to the cause if you feel like this is something of value. We think that this is very important, and principles that can last and make a real difference in the world. And we look forward to that. Visit our website, citizenrepresentatives.org. Like, share, subscribe. Do those things that would help this movement go forward. Adam, any final thoughts?
No, great, good show. Good to be with you. Thanks, Tyler.
All right, thank you, and have a great night.